Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Yes Corner number 3, where we look to promote and raise the awareness of all the wonderful resources that we have for the independence movement, and hopefully beyond that as well. And tonight I'm really pleased to welcome Mike Small, the editor of Bella Caledonia.
Hi.
Hi Mike, how are you doing?
Very good, as much as you can be in a global pandemic. But I'm surviving, yeah. I'm suffering from lockdown hairdo.
The barbers in Scotland not open yet. Oh dear, that's a shame. I got mine cut here in Barcelona, just a few nights away. So not showing off or anything, but there you go. Yeah, things are much kind of calmer here. Our kids have been back at school since September. Really, we're back playing sports and bars are open until 5 o'clock. There's a curfew here, but we're still able to do pretty much what we were doing up until the start of this pandemic last year. So a little bit better here. I'm sure Scotland's not that far behind.
Yeah.
Okay, great, Mike. So, what the first place I thought we should start is, when did Bella start? What created it, and how has the journey been for you over the years since you started doing this?
So we started in 2007, and we started as a blog, really a simple blog with myself and Kevin Williamson. And it kind of emerged out of the pages of Alistair Gray's Poor Things, where he imagines a character that becomes Bella Caledonia, which he likens to Britannia or Marianne in France, or the kind of female figurehead that normally represents a country. And he's envisaged this for Scotland. So it emerged then, and we've been going ever since, but it's certainly developed and changed over that time. It started as sort of pure citizens media, in that nobody got paid and nobody wanted to get paid, and it was nobody's job. And then it kind of morphed and grew and expanded over that time, and it's changed quite a bit since then.
Yeah, 14 years looking back. Scotland's a very different place now than it was then. When you started in 2007, how many other similar resources were there? How many other people were writing? You'd been writing digitally by that point, but how many other kind of blogs and other similar types of media were there at that point?
Virtually none. I mean, I can think of one or two blogs. SNP Tactical Voting was a blog. There was virtually none, really. And then a few came along in the years after us, but we were very much an early starter. And I think the kind of alternative media, new media, and the independence media has sort of developed in a whole number of ways in that intervening period, some of which are really good and some of which are not so good.
Okay, and the role of media in 2007, the new media from 2007. If you look at the role that you played in forming the people of Scotland, we weren't even anywhere near a referendum then, but when you look at kind of like 2014, probably 2012 to 2014, and the role that Bella played in the independence movement, how do you feel it's changed since then to where we are now? And then secondly to that, how important do you think outlets, new media outlets that are consistently focusing on Scotland are for the independence movement?
Well, I think it's a kind of multifaceted question. Certainly at the stage where there was no print media outlet that was in favour of independence, it was absolutely essential to have a different voice in the media backing that. That's changed since then with new newspapers emerging. But I'm a little bit wary about it being a kind of binary between new media and old, or pro-indie media and anti, because I think it's a bit more complex than that. people that are pro-independence write columns for possibly not independent supporting outlets, and I just don't think it's quite as binary as that. And I think also we get into a bit of a bind when we take up all of our political energy attacking the media. You know, I think that ends up becoming kind of like really relentless and quite negative, and we don't explore other ways of campaigning that are more positive. It ends up being almost Trump, where it is the source of all of our problems. That's not to say that the media isn't a significant problem, and there aren't significant problems with it, but I kind of back off that sort of approach, if that makes sense.
Yeah, oh, completely, yeah, and I agree with you completely. I think one of the issues that we have in life is when we try to generalize to make our life so easy, and we are generalizing when we're talking about new media, old media, pro-independence, and not pro-independence, and there's a lot of things that mesh there. Certainly, one of the things that campaigners will say is that the lack of media that's owned by or owned in Scotland is of concern. Do you feel the same? Do you feel that that's a kind of a concern for not just the kind of body politic, but for society as a much wider group?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a wider question about ownership of businesses and organisations in Scotland, not just about the media. And also, I don't think it's a prerequisite that if you were to have media owned in Scotland, that they therefore be pro-independence. That doesn't necessarily follow. But that is a big question. I mean, the media is really struggling in all sorts of ways. I think we have really flawed public broadcast media in Scotland and in the UK. I think we have a real problem with tabloids and the sort of toxicity of the message that gets pumped into the public domain through the tabloids, which was a significant part of the Brexit fiasco. And I think we have social media that is both a liberatory thing and a participatory thing and a fantastic tool, but also can be quite a toxic element itself, both for people's mental health and for how do you develop a public discourse and a public debate in a country that's struggling towards forming a new democracy.
Yeah, I think separating the kind of more traditional media from social media is really important. You can have issues with one that you certainly don't have issues with the other. And I'd love to speak to you at length around social media and how we can all do and use that differently. But thinking again about the media in an independent Scotland, what changes would you like to see in terms of the makeup of the media and also the regulation of the media? And a little bit to that, what do you think is likely in an independent Scotland? I hope those two things are similar, but what would you like to see and what do you think is likely?
Well, one thing that I think is possible, and I think there's lots of examples in Scotland, both before and after independence, of seeing a small country that has a sort of porous democracy, meaning that lobby groups, sometimes in a bad way, but third sector lobby groups in a positive way, can actually find their way through to relevant ministers and press their case and make policy happen. And that's a good thing because people on the ground know their sector best and know what changes need to be made. So in terms of media, I think you could see, for example, public broadcasting changing quite significant because you would have real control over the public broadcast for the very first time. And one thing I'd like to see is us completely rethink what the post-BBC Scottish public broadcasting would look like. Because at the moment we assume that public broadcast is one single big thing. It is the BBC. And I think we could think instead of public broadcasting being kind of decentralised but still publicly funded. So you could think of multiple units producing content up and down the country in different formats and genres. Because Scotland isn't Glasgow, Scotland isn't Edinburgh, and I think it would be important to decentralise that media out into the country. And I think that's something that could be achieved with enough thinking about it. In the same way, I think you could fund newspapers that were co-ops, media hubs that were co-ops, and that did have some regulations, so you weren't just funding things that were nakedly partisan, or had to stick to some guidelines and some regulations. But you could do those things and decentralize your media and democratize your media. And I think you could also, with digital media, there's the opportunity for the media to look a lot more like the country in terms of language, in terms of ethnic diversity, in terms of gender, in a way that isn't really thought about at the moment. I mean, in BBC Scotland, there are constituencies that are what they call super served. So if you're a middle-aged white guy who's really into football, you kind of get a lot of content delivered to you. A lot of content, and I say that as a football fan. And there's whole
and a middle-aged white man, Mike, and as a middle-aged white man.
Indeed. And there's whole constituencies of people that just aren't really served or noticed or represented. And I think we would need to address all of those things. But I do see that there's quite a lot of opportunity there, provided we had enough of a vision to say, what kind of democracy do we want to build? And what role could the media play in that? And kind of turn it round. So rather than just obsess about how awful the BBC is and how awful the media are, think about it in more liberatory terms. Think of it in terms of what kind of media would we like to have in a new democracy that could really be inspiring and useful for our fledgling democracy.
That's a brilliant point, and I think that there's certain elements within the movement that are looking to think, how can we do things a little bit better than currently it's done by the British state. And I think media is a perfect example where we can say we don't need that as something we're relating to. We start from a position and think, how do we do this much better, not how do we change it slightly from where we are. And Bella has a huge cultural aspect to the things that it does. And as I have pulled on my Barcelona jumper tonight, but I live in Catalonia, and the difference between the media here and the media in Scotland, it can't be overstated how different it is, and the importance and the role of culture in the Catalan media here is just absolutely night and day between what we have in Scotland. How do you think an independent Scotland would be able to reflect the culture of the country? Do you think it would be able to do that a little bit better, not as well, or much better than is currently happening at the moment?
I think the potential is to do it much, much better. But I don't think that would happen just by having independence. I think you would need to decolonize and rethink whole institutions. I think you would need to reclaim the arts and culture from elites that have seized it. I think you would need to fund it properly. I think you would need to elevate it to a higher status. I think it often gets treated as an afterthought. Yet, at the same time, there is, if you think of the music and the theatre and the literature that has been pouring out of Scotland for years, the opportunity to use that as a kind of soft power to the world, saying, look, these are our amazing writers, these are our amazing bands, this is our amazing theatre. It's an obvious own goal. And, we have a kind of running joke in Bella about, are we going to do the film article? Because for the last 14 years, we've been writing the same article about why isn't there a film industry in Scotland? Why isn't there a film studio in Scotland? And it just goes on and on and on. It is incredible that this country doesn't have those resources. It's astonishing and it's disgraceful. And so we could do things so much better.
I'm sure we could think of another few areas where we're crying out for resources, but I think culture is a real obvious one for me. And as I said, having this very different view of how a small country and its relationship it has with the culture living in Catalonia has just been completely eye-opening for me. What's that's a kind of grand scheme. What's Bella's plans for the next few years, and maybe I could say up until the next referendum, which looks like it's going to be some point between now and 3 years' time. Where can you see yourself from here into, just maybe 2 or 3 years ahead?
Mm. Well, I've got to plug my crowdfund campaign that we've got going at the moment, and that kind of gives a nod to what we want to do. We want to develop our freelance writers, and they're a mixture of people writing on politics and culture. We've got Ben Ray, who's our European features writer, who is writing from not far from where you are just now. We've got George Gunn, Layla Roxanne Hill. We've got a whole heap of writers up and down the country who, in a way, are kind of emigres from the mainstream media and are covering arts and politics and culture for us. So the reason we want to develop that mix is that we want to do two things. We want to not just have the single lens of one man, which is often what new media outlets become. And I think it gets pretty dull because it's a singular lens.
And it tends to be a white, middle-aged man.
It does. And the second thing we want to do is, if you just talk about constitutional politics constantly, there's a narrow audience for that. It becomes one-dimensional, and people aren't one-dimensional. I am a political geek, but even I get bored with just that kind of narrow definition of the world. So we want to talk about people's lives, about society, about culture, about arts, about music, about everything, to expand that range and that voice. And I think that's really important. And I think the third thing we want to do is we want to speak beyond the bubble of the already converted and obsessed. So I could build up an audience for Bella that was just talking to the Yes crew again and again and again. And I know that's a successful approach, but it's kind of politically redundant, because we've got to speak to beyond that bubble and have engagement in both readership and writers from people who are coming from different perspectives. That doesn't mean it's anything goes, but it does mean that you expand your audience and you speak to a wider audience in society. And so I think that's what we have been doing, and we want to continue to do and build that.
Great. That's dangerous for any product, isn't it? Where it tries to go to a different market, and you just never know how you're going to do that. But I feel that now, having spent a little bit of time supporting Independence Live, it's really important that you take that message to people who are swaying or swithering on voting yes, and not just concentrating on where you are. So in terms of that crowdfunder, where you are at the moment, what's your target, and how are you getting on?
So we were trying to raise £30,000, and we've just hit over 11,000. So we're on 30-something%. Yeah. So it's going well. We're really, really pleased with the response. I was nervous because it's such a difficult time for people. Asking for money in the middle of the pandemic is really difficult. So we appreciate anything anybody gives us. We'll see if recovery kicks in, but it's a very difficult time for people. People's jobs are on the line or have been lost, and furlough is going to end. So we're very appreciative of anybody who gives anything at all to us, and that money will be ring-fenced for our freelancers and will be spent in the coming year to support their work.
Great. I think it's really important, and again, trying to learn from what I've been seeing in Catalonia is to professionalise as much as we can. And I think that's right across the movement, from professional, dedicated, exceptionally talented writers, right through to people who are producing things, who are creating new media, who are running our organisations. People who are able to do this full time, who have skills, tend to have a better result than people who are doing it with a huge best attention but don't have the skill to deliver it. So I suppose that's the reason that you're doing it, isn't it? To be able to say to people, we want really good quality stuff and we're willing to pay you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've still got a kind of hybrid model. I do think there's something valuable in, there's two sides of being amateur. There's the kind of best side of amateur sports, which is really, grounded in community and it's got a kind of ethos about it. And then there's amateurish, which is not the same thing. So I still would like to hang on to that kind of amateur element to Bella, in that it's based not on profit, it's based on, coming from a citizens media background. But at the same time, there's excellent journalists, often young journalists, who make their living through writing or creating their work, and they need to be paid.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned profit and media in the same sentence, and nowadays they don't often fit together particularly well. I've got a question here, which is something I know both you and I have spent a lot of time looking at. How will the Edinburgh Festival progress differently? Can it survive? Sorry, can it continue? But I'll say, can it survive?
Well, I mean, the lobbying has already started, and what they want to do is just get back to normal with as few changes as possible. And I think that the problems of the Edinburgh Festival are not really to do with COVID. They're to do with the whole institution being really confused and the city being kind of under corporate capture. And what happens is that there's an extractivist process, and a handful of big companies come in to the city, often use its commons and its public spaces, often despoil them completely, employ people for pennies, make vast amounts of money that is undisclosed. And it's really, I don't think it's a viable concept anymore. I don't think it's also viable in terms of flying hundreds of thousands of people in short-haul flights in the middle of a climate crisis. And I don't think it's viable in terms of having a metric which is solely based on growth. So every year for decades, they tell us that the festival is bigger than it was last year, and this is great. And that exponential growth is the only way of measuring good. So I think it needs completely rethought. I think it needs taken back and completely reimagined.
Yeah, I would agree. And Michael, I know you've asked the question. You probably don't know that I'm an events organiser, and I've been organising events for over a quarter of a century now. And I've got some views on the Edinburgh Festival as well, which I'd love to have the time to discuss, but we haven't got that. But certainly it's going to change. Mike, final question before you go. One of the things that we're really trying to encourage across the movement is to help and support organisations to work together. Could you tell me just a little example about maybe in one way that you've worked with other organisations within the Yes movement, be that your relationship with the National or your relationship with some of the Yes groups?
So, well, we speak and have spoken at Yes groups up and down the country for years. And we've got a very good relationship with Independence Live, whose work I admire, in terms of co-hosting programs like this. We work with groups on Wheel in the past, and we are generally open to collaborations. I suppose the main way that we collaborate is through being an open forum for people and inviting people to pitch their content and their ideas. And although we've got an editorial outlook, we're unashamedly from left, we're unashamedly about transforming Scotland, and unashamedly aware of the climate crisis, we also publish views we don't agree with to get a multiplicity of views and voices out there. So I think that's our main aim, is to be a multiple collaborator with people and invite people to pitch their ideas and their stories to us.
Great. A personal question for me. I wrote an article for Bella a few years ago, and it took me about a week to write that one article. How do you write so many articles? I mean, how many do you write a day? How many do you write a week? And what is the secret to that kind of consistent output? Because that makes such a huge difference, being able to have that output for a media. How do you do it?
I don't really know. I suppose it's just kind of like everybody's got their different flow activity, and mine is probably writing. And I've probably written almost every day for 14 years. And so sometimes it's not very good or not very coherent, and sometimes it makes more sense. But it's probably a form of therapy for myself.
Well, you're definitely doing yourself a disservice there, because I really enjoy reading what you do. That's great. I've really enjoyed your time. I've put a link to the crowdfunder in the chat. Best of luck with that. If there's anything else Independence Live can do for you, then please do let us know. But I've really enjoyed the chance to have a chat with you tonight, and thanks so much. Thanks, Mike. Bye now.
Fantastic. Bye.